All right, thanks, Eric. Good morning. I'm Alicia, Deeds Communications Director. Really glad you can all join us this morning. Just a couple housekeeping items. Please do mute your phones or computers. Just helps mitigate echoes. And then if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. You can use the raise hand function later, or you can reach out to me by email if you have any tech issues. So with that, I'll send it over to Commissioner Grove.
Thanks, Alicia. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you here. I'm alongside Oren Casal from our Labor Market Information Office, and pleased to bring you our jobs report for August. As you may have seen, the release went out about 30 minutes ago. Minnesota took a pause in job growth in the month of August. We lost 3,100 jobs on a seasonally adjusted basis. That's down 0.1% from July. And we had a revision for July's numbers up to 17,100 jobs. The U.S. in the same month of August gained 315,000 jobs, up 0.2%. So a pause in Minnesota compared to the nation on job growth this month. Of course, we're always looking at the longer term numbers too. It continues to track relatively on pace with the nation. We had employment growth of about 2.1% since January of 2022, while the U.S. grew about 2%. So that's the longer term view of the last 3 months. We're exactly on par with the U.S. for job growth, with 0.5% job growth in the U.S. over the last 3 months and 0.5 job percent growth in Minnesota. Unemployment rate remains below 2%. It's at 1.9% now, up just a tenth of a point. Still the lowest in the nation so far as we know. We'll get those state rankings tomorrow, but still extraordinarily low. And, you know, as a reminder, when the unemployment rate goes up, when these job numbers shift, the way that works is it's people moving out of employment. It's not necessarily signs of massive layoffs or firings. People could just be quitting, taking unpaid leaves. They could be going back to school. They could be retiring. We also know that August is generally a less predictable month in Minnesota. A lot of the firms in our state are ramping down from summer hiring. So there's always some kind of volatility in August, regardless of the kind of broader volatility we've seen in our economy since the pandemic. I think also important to note as context around these numbers that when it comes to unemployment insurance claims, we're still seeing a shrinking of those on a week-over-week basis. Every week, about 1,000 people get off of the unemployment insurance program in Minnesota, and that continued through the last few weeks as well. So those are signs, I think, that we still have a very tight labor market. Labor force participation rate is down to 68.2%. That's part of a much longer term trend that Orion will get into the details on in just a moment. But, you know, a moment of pause in terms of growth in our economy this month, and we've had those moments of pause a lot throughout the last couple of years. We had a pause kind of in early summer. We had a pause late last fall. So we're, of course, tracking this and looking at it, but not speculating too much on what it means. I think we're going to continue to take these kind of longer term month, several month views to get a sense for just what our economy is looking like. You know, I will say, just as it relates to what I'm hearing from employers, whether it's here in the Twin Cities or across the state, as I travel around, is I do not hear anybody saying they are slowing down on trying to hire right now. We are seeing just a huge appetite for workers, particularly in manufacturing. Even though manufacturing, by the numbers this month, did lose a few thousand jobs, it's way up over the year compared to the nation at 4.6% growth compared to 3.7% nationally. Manufacturers cannot hire enough right now. I was in St. Cloud just last night speaking with some business leaders, and the need for labor there is so strong. It's so intense. That has not shifted here at all. On the demographic front, a few trends to point out. We'll go into more detail here as useful. The unemployment rate ticked up slightly for Hispanic workers to 3.6%, but down for Black workers on a 12-month rolling average to 6.6%. That's a pretty big drop, down from 7.3% last month. Of course, we've been tracking this really closely. Many of you may have seen the study that we released last month on sort of an update on our Black labor force. So we are glad to see that number drop down further, but it is still triple the white unemployment rate, and one that we are tracking closely and focusing a lot of our programming on here at Deed. Again, those numbers are on a 12-month rolling average. By the numbers, construction down about 1,900 jobs. Again, seasonality there at play. Manufacturing down, as mentioned before, but again, over the year, really strong. And then just big picture, we always like to look back at this number. We lost 417,600 jobs from February to April in 2020 when the pandemic first hit, and we've now gained 351,800 of those jobs back. About 84% of those jobs lost have now come back to Minnesota, which is good news. Wages and inflation, of course, a national story, true everywhere. You saw the numbers earlier this week released on the CPI inflation index. As a reminder, those numbers are for all urban consumers, and that number is at 8.3% increase in prices over the year. Minnesota wages are up 5.8%, so not keeping up with inflation comparatively. But I think interestingly here, the U.S. Wage rate increase has been about 4.4%. So we're now at a wage growth rate that is faster than the country. That shouldn't be surprising given it's such a tight labor market. But as many of you know, several months ago, we saw actually Minnesota lagging the nation in wage growth. And I think that has since corrected itself, and Minnesota employers are far surpassing the wage growth of some of our neighboring states, or at least the national average at 5.8% compared to 4.4%. So again, we have one of the tightest labor markets in the country. You're going to see employers raising wages to try to entice workers into their firms. So with that, I'm going to turn to Oriane for some additional detail, and then we're happy to answer your questions. Oriane.
There we go. So as the commissioner said, Minnesota took a breather in August with the loss of 3,100 jobs on a seasonally adjusted basis. That's 0.1% of total payroll, and then 5,900 in the private sector. The unemployment rate ticked up 0.1% of 1 percentage point to 1.9%. That was about 2,000 workers. In August. So that's up from its all-time low of 1.8% in June and July. And Minnesota's labor force lost jobs for the second month in a row after 7 straight months of growth. This pushed the labor force participation rate down 0.2 of a point in August to 68.2%. You can advance the slide. Thanks. Black workers continue to see a decline in the unemployment rate. Now it's at 6.6% in August on a 12-month moving basis. The unemployment rate ticked up slightly for Hispanic workers to 3.6% and down slightly for white workers to 2.3%. And next slide. This is the labor force participation rate graph. Black labor force participation rate in Minnesota continued to decline in August on a 12-month moving average basis. It's now at 66.8%. Hispanic labor force participation rate ticked up to 80.4%, and white labor force participation held steady at 68.6%. So compared to February 2020, just prior to the pandemic, white and Hispanic labor force participation rates are up, while Black labor force participation rates are lower by 4.5 percentage points. But again, these do jump around quite a bit. So prior to last month, so in June, Black labor force participation rate had jumped up above white labor force participation rate. So part of this is really our small sample, and just tracking this on a monthly basis is helpful in that way. You can advance the slide. The next slide that'll be coming up is a different slide from the one I've been showing. So this slide goes back to 2002. I would like everyone to be able to see it though, but
Yes,
I know.
I'd love to do that for you, Oriane. I'm not sure.
I know.
Why it's not. I'm so sorry, folks. Hold on.
I'll talk through it.
There we go.
There we go. Okay. So this slide goes back to 2002. It's August numbers from 2002 to 2021, and then the last 8 points on this slide, on the lines of this on this slide, are 2022. So January through August. So I pull that out in that parentheses there. So it displays both labor force participation rate and employment to population ratios for both women and men. So women are in the dark blue and light blue, and men are in the green and red. Both labor force participation and the employment to population ratio lost ground between 2002 and 2019 in a very long-term demographically driven trend. I think there was a question about this last month. That is really being driven by the aging population and people retiring. So larger share of people retiring. And then you can see that there was kind of a bump in August 2018 and August 2019, particularly in female labor force participation and employment to population ratios. And that probably had something to do with the very tight labor market. We were also in a very tight labor market going into the pandemic. And then you can see how it dropped off during the pandemic as people left the labor force and lost their jobs. And then over the last year, so just in 2022, since January, you can see that men's labor force participation rate and employment have continued to tick up slightly. Now, men's labor force participation rate is at 73.2% compared to 72.2% in January, whereas women's labor force participation rates have remained absolutely level. So at 63.8%, that's exactly where women were in January. One thing to remember is that this is a 12-month moving average. So actually the August numbers are a better reflection of what was going on in winter 2022 than they are in August 2022 because it's rolling together an entire year of data. So just keep that in mind. This is a bit retrospective in that way. Again, because of our small sample size, it just the numbers just bounce around too much on a monthly basis. And there's just too much error in them. You can advance the slide. Well, you're all familiar with this graph, so I will just proceed while Alicia fights with PowerPoint. So over the year, Minnesota added 72,549 payroll jobs. That was up 2.5%, with the private sector up 2.7%. 9 of 11 super sectors posted positive over the year growth. This is really not changed from July. So manufacturing, trade, transportation, utilities, information, financial activities, professional and business services, education and health services, leisure and hospitality, other services, and government all posted over the year growth. Within that, professional and business services was up 4.4%, adding 16,000, almost 500 jobs over the year. 10,300 of those were in professional, scientific, and technical services, that portion of that super sector. And then administrative and support and waste management services added almost 5,000 jobs. Management of companies, which also falls into that super sector, added 1,300 jobs. They had been down over the year for a couple months there, but they've popped back up. Manufacturing posted growth of 14,581 jobs over the year. That's up 4.6%. Again, that's surpassing the US. Every published sector, so every sector that we have enough data to provide reliable information on, showed growth. So durable goods was up 5.4%, or almost 11,000 jobs. Non-durable goods was up 3.2%, 3,600 jobs. And then looking at leisure and hospitality, that super sector continued to post the highest over the year growth of all super sectors. It was up 6.5% with the addition of 16,600 jobs over the year. Arts, entertainment, and recreation, which took a pause this month, so actually lost some jobs, posted a 10.7% growth with the addition of almost 5,000 jobs over the year. And accommodation and food services grew 5.5%, adding 11,000, almost 700 jobs. Now we'll go to the monthly seasonally adjusted data. So again, as the commissioner said, we lost 417,600 jobs during the pandemic. We've gained 351,800 of those back as of August. That's 84% of the jobs that we lost. Looking at by industry, construction, professional, scientific, and technical services, and manufacturing have more than regained all the jobs that they lost since February 2022. That you can see the green bars are on the right-hand side, so on the positive side of the y-axis there. State and federal governments, mining and financial activities have continued to lose jobs in Minnesota. And of the sectors that were most impacted during the pandemic, other services has regained 87% of the jobs it lost. Accommodations and food services has regained 84%, and arts, entertainment, and recreation has regained 77% of the jobs that it lost during the recession. So just looking at arts, entertainment, and recreation for a second, because they did lose 1,500 jobs this month in August on a seasonally adjusted basis. So this is actually down 10% from last month in terms of the jobs that they've regained since the recession. And that's because they lost 33.4% of employment between July and August. So that is also a very seasonal sector that bounces around a lot with some very, large events and things like that driving employment in that industry. So we'll just see what it does over the next couple months. Next slide. So this is the wage and inflation slide. And it is a little bit complicated. So these dark green bars are wage growth from 2020 to 2021, and the light green bars are wage growth from 2021 to 2022 in Augusts. And then the CPI is here. So this is 2020 to 2021 August growth, and 2021 to 2022 August growth in the lighter orange bar. Wages rose 5.8% for all private sector jobs in Minnesota and 4.4% in the US over the year in August. So those light green bars, the most left bars, and then US is just to the left of the CPI. All of that growth continued to be offset by inflation. So inflation grew 8.3% over the year in August. A few industries did see wage growth stronger than inflation. Food, services, and drinking places was up 6.8% over the year and 18.9% over 2 years. You can see that's the tallest bar. Nursing and residential care was up 14.7% over the year and 18% over 2 years, and they had a lot of difficulty hiring, and they are seeing more success in replacing some of the workers that they lost during the pandemic now that their wages are beginning to grow. And construction is up 8.9% over the year and 15.2% over 2 years in Minnesota. And again, that's another industry that appears to be having a lot of difficulty attracting and retaining workers. Yeah, and I think we're ready to take questions now. Well, I could talk
Great.
about this one too, if since this slide is up now. Private sector wages in Minnesota increased from $31.16 an hour in January 2022, just preceding the pandemic, to $34.62 in August, and nationally they increased from $28.56 to $32.14. So that graph was showing those trends.
Great. Thanks, Orion. Thanks, everybody. I think with that, we'll turn it to Alicia to moderate questions from the press.
And thanks for your patience today, everyone. Brand new computer and working out the technical issues. I think we've got Theo, please, over to you.
Hi to you both. Commissioner, I think you described the loss of 3,100 jobs off the top of this call as a pause. What gives you the indication that this is a pause?
Well, I think quite literally seen a lot of job growth throughout this year. And so to have a month where we're not seeing job growth is, I guess, just by definition, a pause in that growth. Like we've said many times here, monthly data has been and continues to remain up and down in states across the country. So it's kind of too early to say if this is a pause or the beginning of more job loss or what have you. So I guess that's why we choose that wording of saying it's a pause. That feels like the most accurate way to describe, what it is. Again, I think because of the fact that we're not seeing, massive layoffs by Minnesota companies, we're not seeing our unemployment insurance numbers shift really at all. We're continuing seeing a very tight labor market. We're hearing from employers across the state that they're hiring hand over fist. We think a lot of the fundamentals here still point to just the fact that employers need workers and that jobs are there. So our view at this point is that this looks like a pause. But certainly after having 17,000 jobs last month and then losing 3,000 this month, that's quite a swing. There's no question about that. And the data shows it. And I think we know it's a pause for now. We're going to continue to track these numbers this fall. We continue to do the sort of 3-month average and the over the year numbers for our own understanding as much as the press and everyone else, just to get a sense for how we're tracking more broadly. And again, we're really on pace with the country, both on job growth and a lot of these other metrics. But we're going to see, head into the fall, how this continues to evolve. And again, we're heading into a period of seasonality as well as the weather starts to get colder. Minnesota, more so than other economies, has some of those shifts because of the way that the labor market, fluctuates with weather and some of those seasonal factors. And we'll see how that plays out in the coming months.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. I think I see a couple more hands. Brian, over to you, please.
Hey, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good
We
morning.
can.
Great. Hey, I was wondering, quick question in construction. Looks like construction lost jobs in August and is also down 1,568 for the year. And it looks like it's one of the few sectors that's down in Minnesota, but up overall in the U.S. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and explain why that might be happening.
Orion, do you want to speak to that?
Well, I can certainly try. Just looking at the numbers, construction lost 1,568 jobs over the year, so that's down 1.1%. That was they lost jobs in all 3 of the published sectors that we have, and specialty trade contractors, which had for a very long time been gaining jobs in Minnesota, if you've been tracking that, is down 1,130 jobs over the year. So, why that might be happening, I mean, my best guess is that there's probably a lot of difficulties finding and hiring qualified workers. But again, that's really a guess. I don't have very much more information on why construction is losing jobs. I don't think it's a lack of demand. I think we're seeing plenty of job openings and plenty of attempted hiring there.
Yeah, it's a great
Thanks,
point,
Erin.
Orion. And I would maybe just add a little bit to that to say that, you know, when we talk to manufacturers in Minnesota who supply construction companies with materials and supplies and finished goods, they're still experiencing huge influxes in orders, a lot of backlogs, of course, because of supply chain challenges, but they have not seen a lot of cooling of the economy on construction materials and the need for them. So add that to kind of your contextual view of what's going on here.
Thanks, Commissioner. Kavita, over to you, please. Good morning.
Morning. Hi, guys. I was wondering if you could, it seems like we've lost labor force participation the last 2 months. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts about what might be going on there and if, you know, how much you think that may be factoring into the job losses we saw this month. And I guess the second part of the question is, you know, there's been some more like studies looking at the impact of like long COVID on the labor force, and was curious if you guys have any sense of like of the labor force participation that we haven't gained back, like how much of it could be because of long COVID or other health, you know, related issues. Yeah.
Great question. I mean, these are very much trend lines that we're all tracking and longer term as well. As we've shared here before, and many of you have written about and analyzed yourselves, these longer term trends in labor force participation decrease were on the nigh before COVID even struck. And we've been excited over the last year to see that, in fact, those numbers have turned around after about a 2 or 3% drop at the start of the pandemic. Again, we're still sixth in the nation in terms of labor force participation, so we still rank, you know, incredibly high here, over 5% higher than the national average. But it is concerning, and I think the demographic numbers are concerning for us as well. When you look at female labor force participation not coming back at the same rate as it has for men, we are still 80 to 90,000 slots short on childcare in this state, which is not does not work for people, and certainly doesn't work in a pandemic period. And I think your point on long COVID is real. I mean, we've been tracking these same reports. You know, I guess I'm not hearing or seeing that in Minnesota specific data at this point. So whatever I could offer here would just be conjecture. But the pandemic's effects on our economy are not somehow in the rearview mirror at this point. They are very much here. And I think long COVID, the more we understand about it and the more that we realize it affects a significant number of people who contract the disease, is a real thing. So, you know, I think a lot of reasons that you could see labor force participation dip or rise. Again, not all people giving up in the labor force. You have retirements and other components here too, but part of a longer term trend. Orion, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I certainly haven't seen any good numbers on long COVID, even at the national level. I'm not sure if you have, Kavita. I would actually really like to see those if you've seen them. I think as the commissioner sort of outlined, it seems to be a lot of different factors, it's not like you can just point to one factor. Certainly the long-term demographic trend of the aging population is what's long-term driving lower labor force participation rates. Over the last 2 months, very, very hard to say what is exactly responsible for declining labor force participation rates.
I would just, I mean, Kavita, it sounds like you may have read this Brookings piece, and if others haven't, I'll just drop it in the chat here. This is the best analysis I've seen. The Minneapolis Fed did some interesting, again, I think more national research on this and tried to break it down by the numbers. And their conclusion was that about 4 million people nationally are being kept out of work by COVID. I'm not standing by that data. I'm just a messenger here and sharing it, but thought I'd drop in the chat here since you mentioned it. I found that to be kind of an interesting look at this and the most enlightening view I've seen, at least at a national level. But yeah, I don't think Orion or anybody here has seen a Minnesota specific view of that yet.
Thanks, Commissioner. Let's see. Brian, do you have a final question? Or if not, is there anyone else? I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Sorry, I guess I'll just follow up on the question I had about construction. I think, Orion, you mentioned wages are up 8.9%, is it? Is that year over year? Is that correct? Oh, I
Orion,
think your
come off
mic
of
is
mute,
off.
please.
Good.
I'm on mute. I'm sorry about that. Yes, you're right. It's 8.9% year over year in August. That's correct.
So I would assume that's just a reaction to the fact that they're continuing to struggle to find workers and or sweetening the pot, so to speak.
That would be the most likely explanation. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the construction companies we talk to are really looking in new pockets for labor. I mean, you take a place like Summit Academy that's long been a source of construction training for workers of color in North Minneapolis. I think they've seen gangbuster growth. A lot of the union training programs are really increasing, and they're thinking differently about where to find workers. Maybe we'll end on that note. I think we are continuing to just push companies and help companies to new markets for labor. The tight labor market remains the headline for us here. I mean, there's a pause in job growth here in August, and we're, of course, continue to track the numbers. But the predominant trend that we feel every day, that every Minnesotan and every business feels today, outside of inflation, of course, at a personal level, is this tight labor market. And I think we very much are tracking this closely. Our Summer of Jobs campaign is spilling into September because it's just remained so important for us as we connect businesses to some of these untapped labor pools. You'll continue to see more from us that in the coming weeks on second chance workers coming out of prison, on workers with disabilities, and workers of color as well, because I think there's just still a lot of inefficiencies in our market, and there's a lot of labor that is truly hiding in plain sight that if we can help make those connections, we'll have a much more efficient market. So again, thanks for joining us, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thanks for writing and sharing the news of Minnesota. And if you have any follow-up questions, of course, please reach out to Alicia, and we'll get you what you need as quickly as we can. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.